We're just in time. We have stumbled into a major crime.
They got the girl all frightened. Now that's not nice. I think she is the subject of a sacrifice.
Buddy, we're putting this party on ice.
But first, you know, we really ought to read them their rights.
Read them their rights. Read them their rights.
Well, I'm here tonight to rap about your rights. Cause right now you're in trouble. Don't have to say nothing at all. Y'all got two calls and you better make them on the double. This is a city of crime. So stand alive. This is a city of crime. You better be clean or judge's time.
Hello everyone, welcome to CKTV, welcome to YouTube folks. It is the countdown to Christmas, it's on, we're into December. December 5th is the date to be precisely, and we're here with the comedies of the 1980s, and it's episode 2 of maybe, I said originally 5 episodes, who knows, we could do 8 or 10 episodes before it's all over, but we're going to run right into the new year 2015 with these episodes weekly, and it's going to be good fun. It's the Kyoster here on CKTV YouTube, bringing it to you folks, and as I say, it's all about having fun, and we're going to have a big lineup of films tonight to talk about, 7 to be precise, and tonight's show, and it's going to be a long one. It's going to be a bit longer than the last one. We could be here to up to an hour tonight. The last one was 35 minutes, but the last show actually, we'll just do a wee recap on episode 1. The first episode we talked about it was a Thanksgiving special on last week's episode. We talked about films such as Chevy Chase's National Lampoon's Vacation. We talked about the sequel to that film, European Vacation. We talked about Planes, Trains and Automobiles, and we talked about the great outdoors, and then we finished up talking about Summer Rental, and we covered such great directors as John Hughes and John Landis in them films, and we covered such great actors as John Candy, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, among others. But on tonight's show, we're going to change things up a bit. It is episode 2 of the comedies of the 1980s, and we're going to talk about some other brilliant little gems from that decade, and a very good decade for comedy, as I mentioned before. A lot of very simple comedy, such a lot of like geeky comedy and quirky comedy and stuff, and some very good things on there. There was little comedy groups, people who worked together a lot, such as John Hughes brought the likes of Aykroyd, Candy, Belushi, the Belushi brothers, also the likes of Chevy Chase and Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, all of these big names. John Landis and John Hughes and people like that brought these people together in movies, and they created magic. And also, you might recall, there was other small groups, pockets of actors that used to work together. You remember the Brat Pack, the B-R-A-T, Brat Pack, and it was kind of a take on the Rat Pack from 20 years earlier, but it was actually the Brat Pack, and this was a group of young actors, like teenagers, who became big names in their respective films that they done at that age group, and they became bigger names as they got older. Some of them fell by the wayside as they got older in acting, and some of them became legendary. The likes of Rob Lowe was in them films. He then went on to work in such TV dramas such as The West Wing and Brothers and Sisters and other TV dramas, also in some films, not very successful films, but he's still in the odd film. The likes of Demi Moore became a legend in Hollywood. Also, Emilio Estevez and the likes of Charlie Sheen and the likes of Molly Ringwald was a big star in them movies, but she never really became much later on in her career. Same with Anthony Michael Hall, also was a big name in the Brat Pack, but he never went on to become a massive star later on in his career. but he done the odd thing. But we're going to talk about the Brat Pack. We'll have a special episode all about the so-called Brat Pack in the next, or maybe in a few weeks' time. We're going to do a big episode all about the movies that they made famous in the 1980s. Also, you have pockets of some of the greatest African American actors, such as Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, a few others that really became big names in that field, and the blaxploitation comedies from the 1980s as well. And we're going to have an episode that will cover a lot of them films as well on this comedies of the 80s. There's been such a great array of comedies and such different types of comedies in this particular decade, the dynamic decade, as I like to call it, or as it's been called, the decade of decadence. But the 1980s, the comedies of the 1980s. Tonight we're going to talk about 7 great films, a magnificent 7 of some of the greatest films from that decade. And we're going to start off with a film that you could say was fairly good. In my opinion, it wasn't great. It was it was basically a homage, if you like, to the film, to the 50s and 60s movie that had been out before that, and it was a series in that. And I'm talking about Dragnet. And Dragnet was directed by Tom Mankiewicz, who was, I think he was half Czech or something like that, but he was the director of this film Dragnet. It starred Dan Aykroyd, and it also starred Tom Hanks as a cop duo. A lot of these buddy cop movies were being put out in the 80s. Of course, the Lethal Weapon series, and you had the 48 Hours series and Beverly Hills Cop series and stuff, which we will get to in my my episode that focuses on the African American comedies, with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, etc. But Dragnet is actually it's about a policeman, it's about a cop in Los Angeles, and he is partnered up with Tom Hanks, who's kind of like the crazy cop. Interestingly enough, very much like Mel Gibson in the Lethal Weapon series, and these two cops are on the beat in Los Angeles. Very much a homage to the 50s and 60s version of this franchise. So it's all about they try and bring down this big crime ring that's happening called Pagan, and all around the City of Angels. A lot of crimes being done by this crowd, and these guys are very quirky. Aykroyd plays a straight cop who's very kind of he's funny, but he's funny in the Dan Aykroyd sense of the word, as in he's funny being straight kind of thing. Very funny being trying to be serious, but he's, the way Aykroyd talks, delivers lines and stuff. He's very robotic and stuff, and it comes across funny to the viewer, if you know what I mean. Tom Hanks is brilliant as ever. In the 80s, he started rolling out a load of great comedies. It was the comedies that made Tom Hanks famous, and then as he got older, his career started to go into more dramatic roles. In the 80s, he brought out films such as Turner and Hooch, such as Dragnet, and other films such as Splash. Remember Splash? And he with John Candy and a few others. Remember the film Big, the one where he's the kid in the grown-up's body. That was all good stuff. But Dragnet is definitely, I wouldn't call it one of the best films from the comedies of the 80s, but I would put it up there, maybe in the top 20. And that's been that's been nice, because I definitely wouldn't put it up there with the best of them. It's a good film. It deserves to be on the list, but it pales in comparison to a lot of the ones that I'm going to talk about after a while. I actually have the DVD version of this film. Got it a few years ago. It's definitely worth a look if you're trying to catch up on the great films of the 1980s. you can throw that one in there as part of your research. But definitely Dragnet, take a look at it. Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd, and quite good. I'm going to give that one about 6 out of 10. You know, the rating speaks for itself, really. That is Dragnet.
Dragnet. The story you are about to see this summer is true. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. For instance, Dan Aykroyd.
Ma'am.
Is Sergeant Joe Friday. Tom Hanks is Detective Pep Streebek.
I'm your new partner.
There's a dress code for detectives in robbery homicide. Section 3-605.10, .20, .22, .24, .70, .80.
My name's Friday.
Take a lot of kidding about that?
Almost never.
You know the kinds of things that can fall into an industrial sausage press? Not excluding rodent hairs, bug excrement.
I hate you, Streebek.
You got a lot of repressed feelings, don't you, Friday? Must be what keeps your hair up.
Police officers, ma'am.
Why couldn't you have got here before that big, bad, stupid-looking piece of sewage breath stole my white wedding dress?
Just the facts, ma'am.
We need to ask you a few questions.
Their job.
You know, Friday, I think we finally found your look.
To enforce the laws.
This is shaping up to be a little more than just a series of simple robberies.
And preserve the safety of decent citizens.
Streebek! I found the snake!
Sure, this city isn't perfect. We need a smut-free life for all of our citizens. Cleaner streets, better schools, a good hockey team.
Dragnet. A new generation of courage.
Thank God it's Friday!
Just the facts, ma'am.
Okay, now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about another film from the 1980s. Another good, quite good. This one, very funny, and it puts us another duo type comedy, and it's a situation where they're two spies, and they get sent on a spy mission. They're actually pencil pushers when the movie starts, and then they be sent on this spying mission, and it stars Chevy Chase, who's one of the greats of 80s comedy, of course, 70s and 80s. Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, and of course Dan Aykroyd, who was in the other film Dragnet that we talked about. Aykroyd, hard to beat, but Chevy Chase and himself together is very, very good. And this film is called Spies Like Us, and I would say this one is much better than the other one. When two pencil pushers, Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, don't know about spying, they make up for it in laughs and in Spies Like Us. The two desk jockeys fake their way into becoming spies with limitless limitations in this fun fest that plays like a Bob Hope being Crosby road movie. John Landis is the director of this one. He also directed such gems as Trading Places, and which also stars Dan Aykroyd, to note. But definitely, Spies Like Us is worth a look. I would put that up there probably in my top 10 80s comedies. Chevy Chase, anything with Chevy Chase, I would probably rank high, because I think he's very funny. A lot of people don't rate Chevy Chase very high, but I think he's funny. Dan Aykroyd, also funny in his own way, as I said, a bit robotic, but he does those roles pretty well, and he's probably had the biggest career into the thousands and 2010s and 90s, 2010s. He's probably had the biggest career out of all the ones that were big names in the comedy genre of the 80s. Aykroyd has probably went on to become a pretty long, he's had a lot of longevity on the movie scene and the big movie scene, as has Tom Hanks actually. But Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, Spies Like Us, directed by John Landis, definitely worth taking a look at, folks. And that gets a 7.5 out of 10 in my opinion. So check out that one, folks.
Spies Like Us. Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd.
We've got a very special assignment for you two.
Boy.
Head down!
This is my sister. You can all have her.
You want some coffee? That's a good idea.
Let me see that. Hey, come on.
Honestly, you two were unbelievable.
Stop!
Every minute you don't tell us why you're here, I cut off a finger.
Mine or yours?
Yours.
Damn.
Go! Hi-yo, Silver! Away!
Chevy Chase.
Get us the hell out of here!
Dan Aykroyd.
To think my high school guidance counselor said I'd never amount to anything.
Spies Like Us.
We're Americans!
Now we're going to move on to the third of our films from the comedies of the 1980s. On the Movie Zone here, Movie Zone presents the comedies of the 1980s, episode 2 of I don't know how many here on CKTV YouTube. If you haven't seen the first episode, check it out. There will be a link to it underneath, and it's on YouTube at the minute. I know this is for a niche audience. Not everybody's into this genre and this decade of comedy, but it hasn't had as many. The first episode hasn't had as many views as I thought it might have been. But then, because it's a niche audience, it's for a niche audience. I understand. But take a look at this, and if you like this, go back and take a look at the other one, and vice versa. By the way, pardon the pun, but Vice Versa is another film I'm going to be reviewing in the next few weeks as well on this series, because that one, of course, starring Judge Reinhold, is another great comedy of the 1980s. Anyway, we're going to get on with this episode, and we're going to talk about our next film, the third of 7 on this episode, and this one is called Brewster's Millions, and this one stars Richard Pryor, the legendary Richard Pryor, and his buddy in this film is John Candy, and it's the first of the John Candy representations on this particular episode. He was in 3 of the 5 films we talked about in the last episode, but he is in 4 of the 7 on this episode, so this is the first. Brewster's Millions, all about it's all about this guy Brewster, who's played by Richard Pryor, Montgomery Brewster, and he's a down-and-out baseball player who discovers that he's the only living relative of an eccentric multi-millionaire who has left him $300 million, and but only if he has to spend $30 million inside a small amount of time before he can get this $300 million that he's been left. So he's got this objective to spend $30 million before he can get the $300 million. So himself and John Candy, who's his sidekick, they are going round everywhere trying to spend this $30 million so that he can earn his winnings. So definitely very funny film, directed by Walter Hill, who's someone who hasn't come up that often on these 80s comedies, but definitely he is probably a very good director. He's done well with this one anyway. An executive producer in this one, interestingly to note, is Eugene Levy, who is, of course, himself and John Candy used to do great work on Saturday Night Live back in the 70s and 80s. Levy was in a few good comedies with Candy also, including a film in the early 90s called Armed and Dangerous. But anyway, so Brewster's Millions, definitely worth a look at. I would rate this one pretty high, actually. I'd give this about 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed this one. It was from 1980, let me see here. Brewster's Millions was made in 1982. So it's a fairly early film for John Candy and his legacy, and of course Richard Pryor done a lot of great films over the years. Silver Streak, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, with of course both of them films were part of a series of great films he done with Gene Wilder, who was also a legendary star in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So Richard Pryor and John Candy this time, very, very fun stuff. 8 out of 10 in my book. I just want to go back and tell you the years from these other two films. I forgot about telling you what year they were out. Spies Like Us was out in 1986, and Dragnet was out in 1987. Yeah, greatest year ever, year I was born. But anyway, yep, Dragnet, Spies Like Us, Brewster's Millions, good stuff there. That's the third of our, and the winner so far is Brewster's Millions. It's rated the highest so far, so there you go.
Wants it. Until now, Monty Brewster didn't have it.
They tell me you're my only living relative.
But he just made money the old-fashioned way.
You have 30 days in which to spend $30 million.
He inherited it.
If you can do it, you get 300 million. But if you fail, you don't get diddly.
Why can't I tell my friends?
Because I don't want anybody to help me out.
What's wrong? Spike, what's wrong? $30 million. The man just got $30 million given to him. This is a good day, you know.
He can't keep it unless he can spend it and have nothing left but the shirt on his back.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun with this kind of money.
Jake, I'd like to hire you as my official photographer. Salary $10,000 a week. How would you like to be my personal driver for the next 30 days at $5,000 a week?
What a country. America, love it.
Hey, everybody, anybody want to go to lunch?
Everyone thinks he's crazy.
I want to bet $50,000. It went up. We'll sell it.
I think we should consider the possibility of psychiatric help.
At the rate you're going, you'll have spent your entire inheritance in less than a month, and you'll have nothing to show for it.
But $300 million says he's right on the money. Richard Pryor and John Candy.
It's like that old saying, you know, if push for money, I'd be a millionaire. I'm a millionaire.
Brewster's Millions. Coming soon from Universal Pictures.
Okay, well, we're going to talk now about another film. This is a more gritty one, folks. This is one that the old watershed would be past by the time this one would go on the TV. But this is Stripes, and it's a film starring Bill Murray, and it also has such great acts in it as John Candy. It has a guy called it of course has Harold Ramis, of course, a guy that starred with Bill Murray in the likes of such great films as Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Also films such as Meatballs and Where the Buffalo Roam, and the film also a few other films that are very worth mentioning. Also, it was also written by Harold Ramis, interestingly to note. Also, Stripes was directed by the legendary director Ivan Reitman, who also directed Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters movies I will talk about in one of my future episodes, and that episode will focus on films that have sequels. So I'm going to be calling that the franchise episode. So that will include the likes of Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters series. We'll be talking about the Back to the Future series. We'll be talking about another series that's very interesting, the likes of Fletch and Caddyshack, and also we'll be talking in that episode about a series that I particularly like, the Cannonball Run series, which spawned 3 films actually, but and also Smokey and the Bandit. You couldn't leave out Smokey and the Bandit. Okay, now we're talking Stripes, and Stripes is all about these guys who enroll in the army, and Bill Murray is the central character, and his buddy Harold Ramis. It actually features the guy that's the sergeant in another very famous film from around the same time. But this was made in 1981. But there was a film out later in the 80s, and the sergeant in this film was actually the sergeant in that film, I believe. But John Candy is also in this one, as is a few other fairly big names from the 80s, but some very funny scenes in it. There's a few very dodgy scenes in it as well, you know. It's got a 15s rating, so it's not as easy. Well, I suppose it's not as PG as the other films from the ones we've covered a lot of so far, but it's definitely a lot of fun. One of the most entertaining, probably, of the 80s films. Stripes would be. Interesting storyline, of course, about the guys enrolling in the war during World War II, and not much war scenes because it is a comedy. It's more scenes between the armies in the camp, the war camp, and stuff. Very funny stuff, indeed. A lot of the comedy actors from Canada, like Candy and Murray, in this, and that kind of John Deal is another person in this film. Judge Reinhold is in this film as well. But them Canadian actors that came down and went on SNL, Saturday Night Live, and then got on the big screen in the States, and that really made a big impact. Also, they include Dan Aykroyd. Okay, we're going to move on from Stripes now, and that I would give Stripes a 7 out of 10. Very entertaining film. Definitely not the best of the 80s films, but it's definitely entertaining. So Stripes, the latest in our comedies of the 80s series. That's the 4th of 7 tonight. And 8 out of 10 for Stripes. Or 7 out of 10 for Stripes.
Oh my God, Mama!
Captain Stillman. Major Ellis would like you to look over these interim reports, Captain. Sir?
Reports. That's all I ever do around here. Want some action? Hold that, Corporal. Oh, look at those men. Are those my men, Corporal?
No, sir. Those are Captain Benton's men, sir.
Well, where are my men?
Let's see. Sergeant Hulke is on the confidence course. Sergeant Crocker is on the mortar range.
Terrific. Corporal, bring up the jeep.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's going well so far, folks. We have 4 covered of our 7 tonight on the Movie Zone presents Comedies of the 1980s, episode 2 on CKTV and on YouTube, and it's going good. A lot of fun, folks, bringing these to you. I really enjoy looking back at them, watching them, and deciding different wee facts about them and stuff, and deciding what I think of them. Really love a lot of these great actors from the 80s, very entertaining, more so than a lot of people now. Like I talked about the wee pockets of groups of actors, you know, and but nowadays we have that as well. We have a lot of people who get together nowadays as well from the comedy scene, the likes of Jack Black and Ben Stiller and people like other ones like Owen Wilson and all. They all work together a lot. And then the likes of Adam Sandler and Vince Vaughn and people such as Kevin James and Chris Rock. A lot of them work together as well. You know, so the comedy stars of nowadays are very much a bit like the comedy stars of the 80s. And things are going good. Like there has been a lot of great comedies over the last few years, such as Mall Cop and such as the Grown-Ups series, and such as, you know, there has been good ones, but there's a lot of stuff as well, as I mentioned on the last episode, has a lot of cheap humor and stuff, and I kind of tend to go for the 80s stuff ahead of that, you know. Next one we're going to talk about tonight would be the Blues Brothers, and we all know the Blues Brothers is one of the greatest comedies of the 80s, and definitely one of my favorites. A 1980 film, actually. It was out in 1980 from Universal Pictures, and it was directed by John Landis, also produced by John Landis, and written by, it was actually produced by Robert K. Wise. It was written by John Landis and Dan Aykroyd. It starred Dan Aykroyd and the legendary John Belushi. And of course, John Belushi, he was out of this world, very, very funny guy. He, of course, passed away in I think it was the early 90s. But John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd star as the Blues Brothers. Also, there is great cameos from James Brown, the Godfather of Soul, from Cab Calloway, from Ray Charles, Carrie Fisher, Aretha Franklin, and Henry Gibson. And the Blues Brothers band as well are in it, and there's a few big names in that as well. But I would say the Blues Brothers probably one of the best of the films I'm reviewing today. We're going to talk a bit about the plot now. After the release of Jake Blues, played by John Belushi, from prison, he and his brother Elwood, played by Dan Aykroyd, go to visit an orphanage where they were raised by nuns. They learn that the church stopped its support and will sell the place unless the tax on the property is paid within 11 days. The brothers decide to raise money by putting their blues band back together and staging a big gig. They may be on a mission from God, they say in the film a lot. They say they're on a mission from God, and they're making enemies everywhere they go. Of course, the Blues Brothers, you just heard it there, great storyline and well worth a watch. It's been a few years since I actually watched it, but I remember most of it. And there's a great cameo in this film from the one and only, the king of cameos, John Candy. So he makes a big impact in his cameo as well. And it really is fun stuff. The Blues Brothers, I would give probably, it would be very worthy of a 9 out of 10. Yeah, I would say I would have to give it 9 out of 10. So, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, John Candy, the likes of James Brown, Cab Calloway, Aretha Franklin, and many others. What a cast, and what a film. So a 9 out of 10 for the Blues Brothers, folks. A 1980 film.
You'd better get bright, pal. We got a show to do. Then we got to figure out some way to collect that gate money. Get it to the Cook County Assessor's office as soon as they open in the morning.
Joliet, Jake, and Elwood Blues. Two men with a mission, and only 11 days.
And don't come back until you've redeemed yourselves.
Our Lady of Blessed Acceleration, don't fail me now.
For me and the Lord, we got an understanding.
We're on a mission from God. Lots of space in this mall.
Walking around every day playing games and taking scores. Trying to make other people lose their mind. Well, be careful you don't lose yours. Yeah,
now, how are you going to raise $5,000 in 11 days without ripping off somebody?
Dance to the jailhouse rock. Dance to the jailhouse rock. Dance to the jailhouse rock. Dance to the jailhouse rock.
I remain celibate for you.
Hit it.
My heart's calculating. My true love will be waiting.
If my estimations are correct, we should be very close to the Honorable Richard J. Daley Plaza. That's where they got that Picasso. Yep.
see two guys come in here, black suits, black hats, one carrying a briefcase?
Yeah, I just sent him down there.
Thank you.
John Belushi,
You, how much for your wife?
Dan Aykroyd,
After the gig, maybe we could, hang out together.
James Brown,
I heard the sound in my car.
Cab Calloway, Ray Charles,
You know depreciation, man.
Carrie Fisher,
I must now kill you and your brother.
Aretha Franklin,
You're living with me now, and you're not gonna go sliding around with your old white woman friends.
Henry Gibson,
He better pray the police get to him before we do.
and the Blues Brothers Band.
Let's go, boys.
The Blues Brothers.
Are you the police?
No, ma'am. We're musicians.
And now we're going to move on to another film, and one that I would definitely call one of my favourite films, one of my favourite comedy movies of all time, never mind the 1980s, and it's probably in my top 5 of the 1980s. It stars Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, and it's simply known as The Three Amigos. So The Three Amigos, I just watched it last night on Netflix. I have the DVD here though, and it's such a great film. It's about three wild and crazy caballeros in this comedy adventure that's a fiesta of fun, or should I say a siesta of fun. Co-starring Phil Hartman, John Lovitz, and Joe Montagna. The Three Amigos blaze a side-splitting trail across the comedy frontier. When a small Mexican village is terrorized by a notorious outlaw called Guapo, actually, which means beautiful in Spanish. Just a wee fact that you actually learn in the film, so you don't have to go to school to learn everything, folks. You can learn it from movies. Proven. But anyway, a desperate senora calls upon the only heroes that knows, the legendary Three Amigos. And these courageous cowboys are really just film stars, and the only fighting they've ever done is on the movie set. But when the outlaws attack, the Amigos discover that the banditos and their bullets are real. Now the trio must save the day and save the village and be the true heroes and hang up their spurs in shame forever. Or hang up their spurs in shame. So the Three Amigos, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, definitely worth a watch. That, my friends, is nearly a musical. There's a lot of music, a lot of singing and stuff in it. There's a lot of very cheesy stuff in it, but that's what makes these films, in my opinion, the cheesiness and the fun, you know what I mean? But The Three Amigos, definitely one of my favorites. Of course, it's presented by Mayor Goldwyn, Mayor Productions, of course, and it's brought to you by John Landis. John Landis, the director, once again. John Landis has put out a lot of these great comedies in the 1980s, and the cream of the crop acting in this one as well. The Three Amigos gets a 9.5 out of 10 in my book. I think 9.5 for sure. Probably up there in the top 3, if not number 2 and number 1 in my favorite comedies of the 1980s. The Three Amigos, arriba! Great stuff.
Three Amigos. They were the biggest stars of their day.
The Three Amigos are history.
But that was yesterday.
Look, boys, I know show business. Something always turns up. Telegram for the Three Amigos.
Come with me where moonbeams paint the sky.
Who are you?
The Three Amigos!
I like this guy. They are funny guys. Just kill one of them.
Steve Martin. Chevy Chase.
Do you have anything besides Mexican food?
Martin Short. The Three Amigos.
Throw down your gun! Not you, Dusty! Sorry!
You're so brave.
Whoa, Horsey!
Three Amigos.
I'll come back one day.
Why?
Now we've come down to the last film of tonight's show. It is one that, in this, it's been great bringing you this, of course, the comedies of the 1980s presented by the Movie Zone. Of course, the Movie Zone started a couple of years ago on YouTube. I started this show and covered such things as the Batman series and covered such things as, you know, current stuff and that, a lot of classics and that. Then it went on to radio, of course, in a show and live last year and the year before. I was on the radio presenting a Movie Zone, a version of the Movie Zone, and we covered a lot of great stuff on the radio. Still uploading some of them shows on my Mixcloud channel, by the way. You can check out my Mixcloud channel as well if you're free. You're doing nothing. You can also check out a lot more episodes in the months and years ahead on YouTube, my YouTube channel, CKTV, where I've now revamped the Movie Zone and I'm doing it on little sections of movies, and this is the comedies of the 80s we're concentrating on. The last comedy of the night I'm going to talk about is Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck, one of the greatest comedies, in my opinion, probably up there with the greatest of the 1980s. Probably, definitely another one for the top 5, I would say. On my last episode that I do of this comedy series, I will be counting down my top 20 comedies of the 80s. But Uncle Buck is definitely a top 5er, definitely. John Candy stars as Uncle Buck. John Hughes, the director of this one, him and John Candy had a great team up over the years. They've had done great work together. This is no exception. Also in Uncle Buck is a very young and probably his first big role, and that is Macaulay Culkin. Of course, Macaulay Culkin went on 2 years later to do Home Alone 1. And then 2 years after that, he went on to do Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. That was, of course, in 1990 and 1992. John Candy and Macaulay Culkin are the main stars of this one, Uncle Buck. We can tell you a bit about the storyline now. John Candy stars in this John Hughes comedy as an idle, good-natured bachelor who's left in charge of his nephew and niece during a family crisis. Unaccustomed to suburban life, fun-loving Uncle Buck soon charms his younger relatives Miles and Maisie with his hefty cooking and his new way of doing the laundry. But this carefree style doesn't impress everyone, including Tia, played by Gene Kelly, his rebellious teenage niece, and Shanice, played by Amy Mannigan, his impatient girlfriend. Uncle Buck is the last person you'd think of to watch the kids, but with a little luck and a lot of love, he manages to surprise everyone in this heartwarming family comedy. So yes, Uncle Buck, starring John Candy, also featuring Macaulay Culkin, is one of the greatest of all time comedies, and I would say check it out over the Christmas season, holiday season, whatever you want to call it. I have a lot of American viewers on YouTube. It's the highest highest amount of viewers that I have are from the USA. So I appreciate that, folks. Thank you very much. And you'll hear me using a lot of American terminology and stuff because I watch so many movies and watch wrestling and stuff. It just brushes off on you, but I don't mean to be just putting it on. It just comes out. So, but as someone who's very appreciative of all my American viewers and stuff, and any other viewers I have from this country, Ireland, or the British Isles of that, very, very appreciative. Even of viewers from over in Australia, viewers from Asia, all different parts of the world, which is very, very nice to have, and that's great. Thank you for subscribing. I have about 212, I think it is, subscribers now on YouTube, on CKTV, and the views are up there at well over, oh Jesus, my views are 100 and something thousand views, 120 something thousand views on my YouTube channel, so that's unbelievable. I have a lot to be thankful for there as well. So, but Uncle Buck, I would put it up there, 9.5 out of 10. Absolutely. I wouldn't call it as good as Planes, Trains and Automobiles, which we revealed in the last show, or we reviewed, sorry, in the last show. But I would definitely put it up there as nearly as good as it. That's why I'm giving it a 9.5. It's better than The Great Outdoors in my opinion. Different, probably a bit better. Very, very different situation, obviously. As it is a very different situation from Planes, Trains and Automobiles. But I would definitely put it up there, folks. Uncle Buck, 9.5 out of 10. Great work from John Hughes. We really had a great showcase of John Hughes and John Landis's work on tonight's show. But we're going to have even more great stuff on the shows ahead. As I said, many more shows to come. This was just episode 2, folks. Leading up to Christmas, this show is meant to be a Christmas countdown type show. The next show will be at the latter part of next week. I'll be doing that one, and that will, of course, feature some great stuff as well, and some stuff from the likes of Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, Robin Williams. I'm going to be featuring all them guys on the next show, and such great works from them. Such great works as Coming to America. Remember that one, Coming to America, 1988 classic. We're going to cover that one on next week's show, folks. Just a wee inside scoop for you. Also, we're going to be covering such great films as Popeye. Now, Popeye, a lot of people didn't like Popeye the Sailor Man, the actual movie. But Robin Williams he got that role and he got it for himself, and he done good at it. And of course, we tragically lost Robin Williams last year, or earlier this year. That was a very sad affair, of course. But to all the fans of him, of course, and that was horrible circumstances. But Robin Williams had some great classics. Most of his big films were in the 1990s, but he had a few good comedies in the 1980s, and we're going to be talking about them on next week's show. So join me next week, folks, for the Movie Zone presents the comedies of the 1980s, where we will discuss some great films from Eddie Murphy and Robin Williams. And right now, I'm going to leave you with another clip, and we're going to be giving you the trailer now for Uncle Buck, and we're going to be leaving you with some more clips after that. But it's been Q&Q, the Kyoster, and I've been here with you for the Movie Zone presents the comedies of the 1980s, episode 2, here on CKTV, YouTube. God bless you all, folks. Kyoster, over and out.
Where do you live?
the city.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
On a rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
Buck Russell had always been the black sheep of the family.
I'm stunned that I'm related to you.
Until one night.
Buck, we have a problem with the kids. We're stuck for somebody to watch them.
Oh, please, not that.
Can we trust him?
He's my brother, for God's sake.
I won't let him get into that Satan stuff or any of the new chicks. I'll leave that for me. I'm kidding, huh?
Now, he's making them breakfast.
Cigar?
No, thanks.
Making them lunch. And making them crazy.
What did you do?
He's irresistible.
And I want to ask you why I'm so attracted to you.
I wouldn't even guess at that.
Whoa!
He's unbelievable.
I'm Anita Horgar.
I'm Buck Melanoma. Molly Russell's wart.
He's John Candy. As Uncle Buck.
What does he like to drink? I've been leaving the toilet seats up. Is that what the blue water is? It's not good for him, huh?
Uncle Buck, the new comedy from John Hughes.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid, that's my job.
Coming soon to a theater near you.
Morning in the City of Angels. On this particular occasion, we happen to witness a pagan ritual in progress. See that, Streamek? We're just in time. We have stumbled into a major crime.
They got the girl all frightened. Now that's not nice. I think she is the subject of a sacrifice.
Buddy, we're putting this party on ice.
But first, you know, we really ought to read them their rights.
Read them their rights. Read them their rights.
Well, I'm here tonight to rap about your rights. Cause right now you're in trouble. Don't have to say nothing at all. Y'all got two calls and you better make them on the double. This is a city of crime. So stay alive. This is a city of crime. You better be paying your judge's time.
You're a dangerous mob, and it is our job to bust you all for being violent. While we are here, let's state it clear.
You have the right to remain silent. Well, excuse me, comma, Mr. Crime Stopper, what is wrong with what we're doing? We just like to dance in our goatskin pants around this ancient ruin. Now, it's not so funny that it costs big money if you ever have to hire a lawyer.
It's my duty to inform you and my pleasure to warn you.
We'll provide one for you.